Hello and welcome to the Salt of the Earth podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Cobb, and this is my co-host,
Thomas Pope.
And today we're here to talk about stuff.
As always, we usually talk on this podcast.
Yeah, that's kind of the goal. We try to, and sometimes we mess up our words.
Anyway, what are we talking about?
This is episode 9. So last week we had the great honor to have a guest on our podcast for the very first time.
Ruben
Critchfield, who had a very interesting story. Learned a lot from it, honestly. It was like...
Yeah, you were quiet the most of the time.
I was just sitting there listening because I was like, wow, this is actually very interesting.
It's good. I guess I would use the word testimony kind of what he's gone through.
Yeah. For one, it kind of helps you like understand other perspectives of Christians. Because my perspective is someone who's always been taught the same way and have grown up in the church. And
you grew up in the same church.
Grown up in the same church. His perspective is of somebody who has been taught a certain way and then grown up and had to realize that way had flaws. And then actually work to seek the truth.
Mm-hmm. And leave the community that he grew up in.
And that, he didn't really cover it too much, but from what I understood, involved basically being completely cut off from his family. And
from his
biological family. And he now has a completely surrogate family just for that reason, because he was cut off and being excommunicated from his community. So it was pretty like intense.
Yeah. And I think it's a really good thing because, first of all, it's just a different perspective than what we have. And also, if we think about making disciples and like trying to share the gospel with someone who isn't a Christian, they will have to make some kind of shift. They'll have to change their perspective, their entire worldview. And for some people, like if they're just an atheist or an agnostic, that might not be a huge shift, but for others, like people who have been raised as devout Muslims, that is a massive and very difficult change to make. Mm-hmm. And it's important for us to keep that in mind because there are some people who, in order to become Christians, they really do have to give up pretty much their entire former life. They have to give up their family.
Yeah.
And so it's not... It's a good thing to keep in mind for that reason is sometimes, a lot of times becoming a Christian is not easy. It's not, it's not the nicest, most pleasant route.
Because, even though we obviously weren't Christian since birth, we've been in a Christian culture and a Christian environment. Mm-hmm. And other people may be in an environment of a different faith. And it's not as simple as switching your faith. It's also you have to, they may also call for you to leave your environment, which is like a whole nother level. So there's physical and then there's spiritual, I guess.
Yeah. So
it's like for some people, you're not just completely shifting your spiritual mindset. You're also completely shifting your physical and your relationships. And there's Ruben's case was he lost his biological family, lost his community, and there's some cases that are even more extreme than that. But
yeah, and another thing I really like about it is that the way he was questioning and thinking critically about the community he was in and the things he was being told is a valuable lesson for all of us because none of us are immune to to false teachings or to potentially believing the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. We all have to be examining ourselves and what we believe throughout our lives, especially when people make the jump from like a teenager living at home to going to college and moving out on their own. That jump especially, you have to, in preparation for that and also during that, you have to really be thinking critically because otherwise you're going to fall away pretty much. Is how things work usually.
Yeah. And something we talked about last week is that part of the reason people stay in whatever faith is because it's the path of least resistance, or they'll stay a non-Christian because it's the path of least resistance. People like to stay at what they're doing, and and but the reason for that is because it's the path of least resistance. But so if you, like somebody goes to college, it very easily becomes the path of least resistance to stop going to church more and more.
Right. Once you're on your own and you don't have that family kind of support taking you there every week.
Yeah. And the social pressure.
And yeah, to some degree pressure. When you're really on your own, and that's the moment where, for the first time ever, I would say your faith is tested on its own, where your faith is being tested, not your family's faith.
Mm-hmm.
And I went through a little bit of that. I never was living on my own, but even just going to college and spending more time away from home, even though I still lived with my parents, there's, a lot of things hit you, and you're challenged by a lot of things, and you have to, be strong enough to get through them.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we have to be living a Christian walk, not because it's easy, but because we feel we're doing the right thing. And so if Reuben had just done what was easy, he would have stayed in that church. But he wanted to do the right thing, so he ended up causing him to leave.
This is why it's very frustrating to me and to some preachers and things I listen to when people preach about this prosperity gospel of sorts of you follow Christ, you become a Christian, and your life is going to be great. You're going to have success. You're going to have... It's basically using Christianity as a way of attaining the best life here on earth.
Mm-hmm.
That, in a lot of ways, really annoys me, and besides that, it's flat out untruthful, because if you look through the Bible, you look through what Jesus said and what the Apostle Paul said, it was not, rainbows and lollipops. It was... Things are going to be hard. You're going to be persecuted. You're going to be shunned. Your own family will turn on you. You'll be put in prison. You'll be killed in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
That, when you read through the Gospels and through Acts and the writings of Paul, that is the view you get. And so we can't... when we want the easy path, we're wanting a path other than what we see in Scripture.
The easy path is the wide road. And the wide road is a variety of flavors to it. Mm-hmm. You could be an atheist, or you could just be a unbelieving Christian or an unfaithful Christian.
Yeah.
But in the end, if it's easy, it's probably not the narrow road.
And I guess it's a subject for another day, exactly how hard it is, how easy it has to be, to be on one gate or the other. But at the very minimum, this. The easy gate is at least at maximum 49% of people will go there, right? And at minimum 51%, or at maximum 51% will go to the wide gate, right? So at the very least, this. There's going to be more people going to the wider gate, the easier gate, right? More people will take the easy path and not make it, basically.
Yeah.
And it's probably, I don't think it's actually 49-51. That's probably not the split, but we can't necessarily draw the line, but we know the line is there somewhere,
Yeah.
And I'm inclined to believe that it's harder rather than easier.
Yeah. The prosperity gospel preaching is just like, it's not only completely untruthful, it's deceitful, and it's giving people a false sense of what Christianity is. It's giving them a false doctrine that it leads them and then when they get to a rough patch, you're like, oh, this doesn't make any sense at all. This must not be right. And so
why would God do this to me?
Yeah.
and then as well as that, when American Christian missionaries go to other countries and they bring this idea with them and they teach that you're going to be prosperous and all these things. For those people, it often ends up not being, and then they're wondering, like, are we doing it wrong? Because if they're in a more difficult country to be a Christian, and they're not going to have that kind of prosperity.
Yeah.
They either don't become a Christian, or they become a more biblical kind of Christian where, they realize that it's hard and they rejoice in their sufferings anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, it was great to have Ruben on. Hopefully he'll have more guests in the future. He was a good one to start with. He's been coming to our church for about 6 months now, I think. No, wait, no. It was over a year now. Because he started just before the pandemic. But, yeah, so it's good to learn more about him. It's crazy what stories you'll hear if you just dig into people's lives a little bit. Because people around you may have incredible stories you never know about.
We often don't ask.
We often don't ask.
You know, we don't invest into people's lives as much as we probably should.
Yeah. I just got so much value out of listening to Ruben's story. I mean, imagine there's probably other people like him that I would get a lot of value out of their story. I should ask more, I guess.
Yeah, and we just don't have the kind of relationships with other Christians, even of our own church, even that we've known and been going to church with for a long time. And that's a little bit concerning, I would say, maybe. If we're all supposed to be one body, if we're all supposed to love each other, but we don't really know each other.
Makes it hard.
Makes it hard. So anyway, just some opening remarks on that last video. If you haven't watched it, you should watch it. It was great.
Yeah, it's definitely the highlight of our short time here on podcasting. But
out of 8 episodes so far, it was maybe the best. I don't know.
Yeah, it was
up there.
It was the highlight for me anyway.
We should have more guests.
Yeah, and so we're going to talk about Thomas's video. This is actually not the one that came out this week. This is the one that came out 2 weeks ago. But we got a little behind on reviewing videos. But so Thomas's video is actually pretty well affiliated with something we talked about. I think it was in podcast episode 5 or 6.
Tradition? No, hold on.
We talked about
a separation from the world.
Yes,
yeah.
That was 7 actually. No, wait, 6 or 7?
7.
7. No, 7 was mentoring.
Oh.
It was 6.
Okay, we don't know our own numbers.
So we talked about this in episode 6, and then Thomas made his own video about it, and so we'll just, I guess we'll.
It was a really off the cuff video. Like, I didn't write anything down, but so hopefully it ended up being okay.
Yeah, I thought it was good.
So the general idea, though, and yeah, we've mentioned this on the podcast before. I've mentioned this to several people. Kind of share this vision I have, I guess, of what if we didn't live like more active, on fire Christians just whenever there's a rally or a camp.
Yeah,
is that's the core question of what I was asking, and what I'm still asking is, what if we lived more like that all the time? And that's pretty much the core of it.
It would change our entire lives, I feel like.
Or in order to live like that, we would have to change our entire lives.
Yeah.
And then maybe they would continue to change our lives. It's a big switch, because once you actually think about devoting significantly more time to Christ, essentially, in meeting with other Christians and studying God's word, and it would take more of your time doing that, and so you're sacrificing your own time, essentially, is the hardest part, I suppose.
You're sacrificing money if you were going to work. I mean, sacrificing personal, like, fun time. It would be a sacrifice as far as the time goes, mostly, but it would be worth it.
But if you think about it, what would be the outcome of spending significantly more time each week studying God's word, having fellowship with people, spending intentional time in prayer? What would be the outcome of that?
Well, I think the biggest outcome is we would start to work more as a team, as a church, and we start to really, and I think we'd really start to start working together on bigger projects. Bigger goals, because we actually felt like if these people are in fellowship with us every single day, I mean they're willing to put the level of commitment to do something with me, and I can trust them,
right?
Because I know them well now, and that's the biggest difference I see. Because I'm not sure if you've ever been in a situation where you're always reluctant to ask people to do stuff, and to really like try to be passionate about things with people, just because you're like they may not have the same level of you don't trust their level of commitment, I guess.
Yeah, you're not as sure about how willing they are to commit. Yeah.
And so you don't. It's hard to ask people to do like crazy things or like things that take a lot of time or things that take a lot of passion, because you just don't want you feel like you feel like you can't trust their level of commitment.
Well, you gotta have a relationship first
Yeah.
in order to know that. And I get it's the same way with if you were trying to get someone to become a Christian, right? You can't just say, "Hey, here's a bunch of evidence, become a Christian," because they're not going to commit the time when they don't know it, when you don't have a relationship with them, especially.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to. Well, discipling and fellowship is all about relationships,
mm-hmm.
and relationships are the core of the church and the core of our outreach. So that's why spending time together is so important, because that's how you build relationships.
Right. So I guess when I originally had my idea, and we talked about this on the podcast, I was thinking more along the lines of you're having like a Bible study or something like that every day of the week in some form.
Mm-hmm.
As time went on a little bit, I was thinking about it, and I'm like, it's not necessarily having a Bible study every day or having some sort of church service every single day. It's just that fellowship, you know. You could just be meeting with Christians and doing something fun even, right?
Yeah.
But you're meeting with Christians and you're not just doing something fun, you know. You could be talking about what you learned that week.
And it has to be a Christian environment, because I'm not sure if you ever noticed, you can meet with Christians, but not in a Christian environment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you're meeting with them, but you're not. You're not like making an environment where you can talk about like things.
Right. You're just having fun, like
Yeah.
you would with anyone else.
You're not really setting up yourself up to build deeper, to talk about things like, or faith things, like, and so that's also part of it, is you can do stuff with fun with them, but you have to be like, this is a good environment for cultivating what we need.
Well, a lot of that comes from as well the fact that a lot of times we are not thinking that way.
Yeah, when we go into it,
we're not thinking of spiritual things ourselves or the possibility of having spiritual conversations. We are thinking about having the fun or hanging out with someone, and that's what we do. We don't.
So then we start out,
we talk about whatever people normally talk about, small talk and stuff, and we don't think about it because we ourselves are not thinking about spiritual things.
Yeah, and then once we get started on that train of topic, we never really get back to it usually.
Yeah, usually not. So I guess at the core of this idea of constant revival, of constantly being more on fire, is not necessarily the fact that you're meeting in a certain way or how you're meeting. It's when you get to the core of it, it's inside yourself. What are you thinking about the majority of the time? What are the majority of your conversations about? And then transitioning into that, how do you spend the majority of your time, you know? Because you could just be doing something fun with, you know, a Christian friend, and you could make that a deep spiritual moment. Just have a short conversation. Doesn't have to be the entire time. You know, you're just talking about stuff, and the stuff you happen to talk about in your day, because that's what you're thinking about, is spiritual.
Yeah.
So, like, how often at, like, church or when you're hanging out with another Christian, do we ask, like, a question like, so what have you been learning in the Word recently? Or what's something that you've been really convicted by recently? What have you read recently in the Bible or in another book even?
Yeah. And we don't ask those questions, at least I don't. And I think that's partly because I guess I don't trust that people are going to want to be on that wavelength.
Mm-hmm.
And then people probably don't trust that I want to be on that wavelength either. It's always safe to talk about, like, worldly things like hobbies or jobs or weather.
And then we get back to safe. What is safe? Safe is easy.
And so I think that it starts off with making a leap of faith. Like, I mean, they probably will want to talk about this. You don't know until you try.
Right. And even before that, we talk about you having that mindset yourself.
Yeah.
So if you are thinking about spiritual things throughout your day, going about your other activities, and you're really being touched by what you're reading in the Word, you're going to be much more likely to have a spiritual conversation with someone.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I see it as the question itself is a fairly easy one to ask. Once you can get over the barrier of just talking about something deeper than the weather.
Yeah.
The hard part is really just, okay, we are now going out into deeper waters, right?
Yeah.
I can feel the water going up, This is not the shallows that I'm used to. Just once we get over that barrier or that reluctance, yeah. Once we do that and the conversation has started, it's easy. And it doesn't have to be a long conversation. Just ask them what they're learning or they're reading, and by then you probably have a good conversation going. And I guess I could mention this again. The change starts with us, and once we get into that mindset and we start showing other people that we care a little bit about their spiritual growth, and we actually want to know and we're actually investing in them,
mm-hmm.
then they're more likely to start doing it, both to us and to others.
Yeah.
So the goal is to create like a snowball effect, kind of.
Yeah. We need to start creating an environment around ourselves of spiritual thinking, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts with us, and then
that starts with how you spend your personal time, basically.
Yeah.
How are you? And this is something I'm really bad at. Are you reading the Bible daily? Are you praying, spending significant time in prayer? And I've struggled to start those habits for so long, and I'm still struggling. But starting with things like that,
yeah,
and then the outcome of that will be, well, you're going to be thinking about whatever you are spending your time doing, and you're going to spend your time doing whatever you're thinking about.
mm-hmm.
So the idea is just get one of those moving in the direction of thinking about spiritual matters, and then the other will follow.
Yeah.
So what do you think about this idea of, I guess, constant revival? Where would you see it going if it were to happen in your life and in this church?
Well,
what's like the baby step in your mind?
Well, I think the baby step would be to have more regular, like, small groups or get-togethers at a centralized location, which would be this church building. Like, yeah, I think the way this best way to start, and we kind of already went over this a little bit, is to try and find more reasons to get together and talk about something deep and
maybe go a little bit beyond the surface level.
Yeah, get together for a spiritual reason that pushes people to grow. Like a small group where everybody in that small group wants to come, and they're all willing to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually people will be attracted to that, and they'll come out of their own free will. That's a good place to start. And then you start having variations of that more often, where it's something people go to because they want to, and they are challenged.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually Yeah, like it could start off with a couple nights a week. You do something at the church building. You have food. You people that want to come because they actually enjoy it, and we challenge them, and we have challenging conversations. Because honestly, I think people would enjoy church more if they feel like they're actually being pushed. Like
Yeah.
certain types of people, not everybody, but like, and those are the types of people that really excel these types of things.
Well,
Does that make sense?
yeah, that makes sense. If we're all being catered to and church becomes whatever we want it to be, then it loses a lot of its meaning, and the people who care more about meaning and about truth aren't going to be as interested.
It's not going to be it's going to be somewhat boring.
And yeah, it's going to be boring. And at the same time, if people aren't being pushed, if they aren't being challenged, they're not going to really grow. They're just going to keep stagnating for the rest of their lives and never accomplish anything, essentially. And that's not the way the church is supposed to be. The church is supposed to be vibrant and alive, and we're supposed to have a deeper kind of unity that is different from the way the world is. And we're supposed to work towards that, and we should be training up those younger than us, giving them our knowledge and experience, and helping them grow, and then everyone kind of grows as a unit, and then eventually people go to the point where they feel compelled to go and start other churches or go to other churches and help them out as well. So in the end, the final goal of like a really healthy, active church is that it goes beyond itself. It's not just feeding people; it's equipping them.
Yeah. And so I think the basis to start like a more constant revival type of atmosphere is you build a small groups with people that are willing and want to be challenged, and they enjoy like hard conversations. Because I think part of the problem with like Bible studies with like the whole congregation is not everybody really wants to be challenged, and then the teacher starts catering to those people somewhat.
Yeah.
They don't. They're like, you know what? They accept the fact that there's some people who just don't want to be challenged, and then they don't try to make it too hard on everybody.
Well, and some people will be offended and get angry, and
And so if you have an atmosphere where people are not afraid to be like to challenge and to push and to bring up controversial topics, and to really like get into the word, like not just to make a lesson but to prove a point, just creating that sort of atmosphere where
the kind of atmosphere where I heard a story of this one preacher had started. It was either a small group or he had started a new house church or something like that. So it was a fairly small group of people. You would consider it a small group. And what was that supposed to be like a 1 hour Bible study or prayer meeting or something like that, ended up being like 13 hours of prayer or something like that, because they just got into it and became so I don't know, enthralled by it that nobody wanted to leave.
Yeah.
They just got to a point where they were just so focused on the word and on prayer that why leave? Because they found something good.
Yeah.
So I guess that's kind of an indication of the thing we're talking about, where it's you don't think about that in a normal church service, right?
Yeah.
Your normal church service is very structured. It has a certain amount of time, and if it goes beyond that, people are annoyed.
And just to clarify something, when I say that you want to start these types of things with people that are really passionate and want to be pushed, I'm not saying that to exclude those who don't want that yet. I'm saying that so we can build a model that people can see what it's like.
Right.
And then they'll want that themselves. Because people don't want what they don't see. And if we can build a model of a core group of people that really is willing to do challenging things, then people will actually see that, and then hopefully everybody in the church eventually comes around to that way of thinking.
And And I think even inviting a couple people who aren't as spiritually mature or maybe as ready for that is just as good, because if they grow up in that environment, if that's what they learn from, then that's what they're going to go and do themselves.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm not talking about spiritual mature. I'm talking about people that are like want to be pushed. And so if you have a group of some people, everybody wants to be there and they want to grow.
Mm-hmm.
But some people are more spiritually mature than others. That's where you have a lot of opportunities for mentorships and discipling.
Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
But so like if we had a small group and then we're like, oh, these people are here, that they're not quite as mature as these people. Oh, yeah, let's break off into mentorship groups.
Sometimes it's good to break off into smaller groups, but not for the purpose of like, oh, these people aren't going to want to talk about this, so they can go do their own thing.
Yeah. Like I can imagine like you can meet on a Friday night. You have food, everybody arrives, you like see who's there. It's like, okay, let's do something together for a little while, like pray or something, then let's break off into groups. You guys take these people,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, just something like that would be really fun.
And if you've ever been in a good small group or something, like, how like important that is and how much help it can be. 'Cause I really hadn't until I was going to college, and once I had that, I'm like, oh, this is good. I need to have this more. Until then, I hadn't really seen the benefit of studying with other people or with having that kind of deeper connection with people.
Yeah.
Because I just hadn't had it. I didn't know about it. And so that's one thing I want to... one thing I want to expose younger people to, like teens and stuff, is this idea of a deeper kind of Bible study, for instance.
Yeah.
And then show them that, hey, this is what it could be. It doesn't have to be boring.
Mm-hmm. And people get bored when they're not challenged and they're not like, they don't see passion. Passion and challenge is what excites people, especially younger people.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I was really excited when you Amira said that you might be thinking about starting one.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be really good.
You need to get the ball rolling on that. We should just choose a starting time and then contact everyone.
Yeah. Do it.
I don't know why there's maybe a couple more people we could ask, but we have enough people where we could start.
Yeah, you only need like 5 people to start.
But
there's 3 of us between you, me, and Amir. So 2 more people should be good to get going.
The end goal of this, though, of living this type of life, is essentially God is in every part of your life in some form. When you're at work, he's obviously not going to take as much of a part as when you're in the midst of a Bible study, but he's still there. You're still thinking about spiritual things. You're still looking for opportunities to share the gospel with people around you. I just actually, listening to an audiobook just today, I heard this analogy. So you think of like a gang, right? Mm-hmm. So like a criminal gang. They're usually very tight-knit. They refer to themselves as family. The church also sometimes refers to themselves as a family. They're very loyal to each other. They're not going to let each other down. They live their lives together, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
How absurd would it sound to think of a gang as a once-a-week, hour-and-a-half thing? Like, can you picture one gang member saying to another, like, hey, man, you want to go to gang? We're like, how was gang this week? Oh, it was pretty good, man. And the other one's like, oh, I couldn't make it this week because, how absurd would that be?
Yeah, that's interesting, because the gang would not be able to stay together. They wouldn't trust each other.
They wouldn't trust each other. They wouldn't be living together. It would basically be meaningless.
Yeah, and then eventually they'd start having fights among themselves and kill each other.
Maybe. But so the point of being that, using the comparison of a gang, churches are supposed to also be a family. They're also supposed to be one. They're supposed to be unified and loyal to each other.
Yeah.
But why do we think it's acceptable and actually normal to have this once-a-week thing, and then the rest of the time we're not doing anything related to the church? We're not fellowshipping any more than that. We're not meaning any more than that. It doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
How can we develop that level of loyalty and love if we avoid each other the majority of the week? And, oh man, there's something else I wanted to say.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting it.
Anyway, yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for a small group. I'm excited for something that we've talked about here to take place here at this building. Hopefully, I mean, maybe even, we've talked about different strategies.
I guess the hard part and the end goal is just to start doing it.
Yeah, I think we have all the information or all the we have what we need on our end. We just need to get the people involved.
and sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and that starts with your a small group. That's one way to start. Another way to start is start having these podcasts be more of a group thing.
Right. So when I made that video, for those of you watching, you can now hear. We haven't really implemented anything from that video just quite yet. I've not started living that vision. I just had the vision and I wanted to share it. More so because not because I was already doing it and I knew it would be really and knew it was really good from experience, but just thinking about it, I realized, this is much closer to what we see in the Bible than what we're doing right now. And it's probably going to be good. And I wanted to share that. Really, the whole goal of the video was, and the whole goal of us talking here is just kind of share that vision in a way.
Yeah.
So that maybe it will also become your vision.
Mm-hmm. And we need to constantly remind ourselves of this goal.
And that.
And which is, hopefully we can do this every week.
Yeah.
How are we doing on this?
So, any more thoughts on my video?
I think we're about wrapped that up.
Okay, so we have another thing, which is our main topic for the night, which is the power of questions. So, throughout the Gospels, Jesus asks a lot of questions. He actually answers a lot of questions with questions. He just all around uses a whole lot of questions. And so today we have a really long list of questions, and we're just going to kind of read through them and talk about why they are so powerful and why we find meaning in them. Yeah,
and we'll try to keep up with our Bibles, hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah.
And so if we need context, we can.
So Jesus is like the master of how to use questions, and I think there's a lot of things we can learn by how he used them. Unfortunately, we can't really go into them all in super deep depth right now. But if you really want to learn from how Jesus uses questions, just read through all the Gospels, really. Just all of them, and then pay attention to the context around whenever he asks questions or just whenever he's speaking, because that's important.
Yeah, okay. Context is important, apparently.
So.
Oh, Thomas, we're going to do this dramatic, by the way.
Oh, we're going to do it dramatic?
Yep, the questions.
What does that even mean? Okay, hold on. I'm going to try it, and you tell me if I got it right.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to try this first question here. So this one comes from Matthew 5:43-47. You have heard that it was said, "You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. And here's the actual question. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? If you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Therefore, you are to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. So I gave way more than the verse there, but
that was really good. We're gonna get some good sound bites out of this.
Awesome. So the question here is: if you greet only your brethren, what is unusual about that? Do not unbelievers do the same? It's a good question. I think it's a similar question to you made a video on asking the question: are we any different? Are we any different than everyone else?
Yeah.
This is kind of similar, and I think another gospel puts it like, if you love only those who love you, what is that? Even sinners love those who love them. Mm-hmm. So the idea is, if we only love and do good things to the people who reciprocate it to us, to those who we already really know, or to our family, what's the point? Everyone does that.
It's shallow. It's not. It's
It-
not above and beyond.
when everyone does that. Everyone will have a natural love for those who help them, for their family, if they have a halfway decent family, for their friends. If somebody gave you a bunch of money, you would naturally probably like them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good question for us to ask ourselves, because if we're not looking any different than anyone else, well, why not?
Yeah.
Okay, you got another question?
Yes, Matthew 6:20. Wait, Matthew 6:27. Let me find it here. Okay. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you'll eat or drink, or about your body, what you'll wear. Is your life not more important than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you add a single hour to his life by worrying?
And why are you worried about clothing? So there's several questions there.
The gist of it is, if God can take care of birds and wheat things,
Wheat things.
the lilies of the field, he can take care of us because he loves us much more than them.
Mm-hmm.
And we sometimes like to, and sometimes we worry about physical things a lot,
Right.
and we shouldn't.
I have a video that's coming up that kind of talks about this, essentially. Basically, the point is, you should be content and not worry, because God's got you.
Yeah.
He's got the birds taken care of.
He's got the whole world in his hands.
Got the whole world. There's actually a song. It's by Corey Asbury. It's called Sparrows, which I think about.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's from another verse that Jesus said, but the punchline is, "You take good care of me." It's like well, it says it again.
That's right.
You take good care of me. Something like that.
We need to do a singing show sometime.
A singing show,
Or like start having like a daily, or like a weekly song.
where we sing horribly out of tune.
Or we could karaoke. I don't know. It depends.
Okay. Well, we'll think on that one. So yeah, basic point of this question is, he's asking it very rhetorically. Jesus is. He's like,
well, I asked most of his questions, or a good percentage.
A lot of them are like that. It's like, can any of you add hair to your head? Or like, who can add an hour to their life by worrying?
Oh, that's right. He's talking about bald people. Don't worry if you're going bald. It's fine. He's
probably in my future. Yeah. So punchline is, no, you can't add hair to your head or an hour to your life. So just be chill about it.
Yeah.
All right. Next one comes from Matthew 7, verses 1 through 5. Do not judge what you will not. I'm going to start again. Do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged. And by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but you do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, and behold, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. So, this verse is quoted a lot. Judge not lest you be judged. The idea... Oh, sorry. The idea of it is, and the question that Jesus is asking here is, why are you noticing the small flaws of somebody else when you also have flaws, and in fact, they're bigger?
Basically, it's saying we shouldn't be hypocrites.
Yeah, don't be a hypocrite.
Yeah, dude. We even sometimes our hypocrisy is so bad we can't see the problems in we distort the problems in other people's lives around our big problems in our lives.
It's much easier to see other people's faults. And usually we assume that's because we just have fewer faults. But often that's not the case.
Yeah. I mean, I can see faults in everybody just fine. It's not that hard.
But then when you start asking questions about yourself,
Yeah.
you got to have an inward focused eye.
Okay.
Next one.
Let's see. I'm pretty sure there's a typo in question 14.
My numbers are different, so.
Oh. The one from Matthew 12:34.
Oh yeah, it's supposed to say good.
I was gonna say. I'll read that one. I'll find it.
So Matthew 12:34.
Matthew 12:34. Make a tree good and its fruit will be good, or make a tree bad and its fruit will be bad. For a tree recognized by its
A tree is recognized by its fruit.
make a tree good and make a tree good and its fruit will be good, or make a tree bad and its fruit will be bad. For a tree is recognized by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you who are evil say anything good? For a mouth speaks what the heart is full of. A good man brings up good things out of the good stored within him, and an evil man brings up evil things out of the evil stored up within him.
I think the voices are being distracting. So what's the question it asks here? Can you just...
Say it in a whole voice.
Yeah.
The question is, how can somebody who's evil say good things, or also on the same token, how can somebody who's good say evil things?
Right. And the context there is good trees will bear good fruit, right? So you will know them by their fruits is another thing that Jesus said. So
Yeah.
basically, if you're producing bad fruit, or if you're if you're producing bad fruit, you're a bad tree. Pretty much.
Producing good fruit, you're a good tree.
And if you're trying to say good things but you're bad, then just stop. Just stop. Pretty much.
The one in Matthew 14:31 needs no context at all.
No, not at all. So we'll read that one. Matthew 14:31. Why do you doubt? Or why did you doubt? Is the question. The context of that is important because you have no idea what he's talking about otherwise. So this is when Peter's walking on water. And he gets distracted by the waves and the rocks, and then he starts sinking. And this is a question Jesus asked his disciples like a lot of times, pretty much in some form. Why did you doubt? Why did you have so little faith? Why do you not understand things like this? And it's a good question for us to ask ourselves. Why are we doubting?
Mm-hmm.
Like, Jesus is God. He can pretty much do everything.
He can do everything. To rephrase that.
I'm going to go back to Matthew 12:48 as well. This question is, who are my mother? No, sorry. Who are my mother?
No, his mother.
Who is my mother and who are my brothers? And stretching out his hand toward his disciples, he said, Behold my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father who is in heaven, he is my brother and sister and mother. Oh, man. Verbal typos tonight.
Well, this is in the Bible, but for whoever does the will of my Father who's in heaven, he is my mother, my sister, and my brothers. I know it's just an expression, but
yes,
it's an expression, so it's fine. But.
So essentially, this is when Jesus is speaking, and his actual mother and brothers are there, and then the people are like, "Hey, dude, your mom's here," and he's like, "Who is my mom?" Making a point that, and then he points to his disciples. These are my family, essentially, is what he's saying.
Yeah.
Get that smirk off your face. As Christians, we should be a family. And our true family is not necessarily our physical family. Because they can go a different way. Our true family is our spiritual family, is our fellow Christians.
Yeah.
So when it says brother, it doesn't mean sibling. It
means sibling in Christ.
It means your brother, your sibling in Christ. Right? Okay, give us another question.
Okay. Well, here's a good one. Matthew 15:3.
I think we've gone over this one before in another podcast.
I like this verse. It's very
because it supports your positions.
Exactly. I know how this works. I'll start at verse 1. Then some Pharisees and teachers of the law came to Jesus from Jerusalem and asked, "Why do your disciples break tradition with the elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat."
So the Pharisees are getting on Jesus for not treating their traditions like law, which they aren't. The law never said anything about washing your hands. Well, I don't think it made it a commandment to wash before you ate.
Yeah.
It might say something about washing.
The law talks about a lot of things, so it's hard to say, but
there's a lot of
Leviticus is a big book. Anyway, Jesus replied, "And why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? For God said, 'Honor your father and mother,' and anyone who curses their father and mother is to be put to death. But you say that if anyone declares that what might have been used to help their father and mother is devoted to God, then they are to honor their father and mother with it. Then you nullify the word of God for the sake of your tradition. You hypocrites, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me."
So Jesus is in our standard, our daily. In the standards of our day, he's a little bit impolite because he answers a question with a question, which he does a lot, but I feel like he's justified in doing it. So they ask him, "Why don't your disciples wash their hands before they eat?" And he's like, "Well, why do you teach the traditions more than commandments, basically?"
Yep.
Not a good thing to do. Okay, Matthew 16:13. Jesus is walking with his disciples, is the context. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he was asking his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And then they go and answer, a bunch of things. John the Baptist, Elijah, a prophet. And then he asks his bigger question, "Who do you say that I am?" To which Peter replies, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And I think that's a good question for us to ask ourselves. It's two things. Like, who do other people say that Jesus is? And then who do we say that he is? Because those are important questions. And in knowing what another person thinks about Jesus is it's an important thing if you're actually going to try to share the gospel with them. Know their starting point. What do they think of him right now?
Because there's actually, for me, it's weird when I think about this, but there's a lot of different views of what Jesus is. There's some people say some people say he's the Son of the Most High God. Some people say he's a great teacher. Some people say he's a prophet. There's all sorts of interpretations. Some people probably say he didn't exist.
Most historians say he does exist, but that he was just
a
really great guy or something.
Yeah, a prophet,
So there's a good question to ask yourself. Clear it up for yourself first. The answer could be easy, but you could also take it much deeper. But then also, when you're talking with someone else, maybe someone who isn't a Christian, ask them. Do you got one? Oh, no. We're doing 16:26.
16:26.
Yeah. So Matthew 16:26. If you haven't noticed by now, these are in order.
Yeah, just nice.
So I'm going to start with verse 24. So Jesus says to his disciples, "If anyone wishes to come after me, He must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? That's a big question.
Yeah, that's deep.
You think about all the pursuits of life and all the things we normally strive for and think of as so important. This question asks, well, you could have all of that. What if you really did have everything you wanted? What would be the point if you gave up your soul in the process of getting it?
It would cost your immortal soul.
It's not a good trade. So you think of that and then you make the point, then we should value our souls and our faith as much more important than everything else in this life.
Yeah.
Because that is the thing that's more valuable. And there's a warning here, I think, as well. For the Son of Man is going to come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and will then repay every man according to his deeds.
Judgment and fire.
Some people are going to be repaid very nicely because they
did very nice deeds.
They kept their souls. Other people who went after the things of the world, their repayment is not going to be pleasant.
Yeah.
Okay, now you choose one.
I think let's read this without context first, make it more interesting.
Okay, no context. Where is this found?
Let me find it again. Matthew 26:10.
Go ahead and read it.
Why do you make trouble for the woman?
So what is the context? Can you remember without looking?
Well, it's actually technically a singular woman, but it makes it more interesting if you say woman. Why do you make trouble for the woman? Anyway. It's talking about the person that, the woman that poured perfume on Jesus' feet, and all the disciples were annoyed because she was very expensive perfume, and they thought, she could have sold the money and given it to the poor. Though, if you look into it, Judas was actually saying that out of selfishness because he stole from the money bag. But Jesus reminded them that, the groom is with, the bridegroom is with the bridal party. They celebrate. The poor will always have with us.
Yeah, the poor you will always have. So yeah, you got the correct story that it was from. Why do you bother the woman? She was doing a good deed.
Yeah.
And people were getting on her because why are you wasting this perfume? It's she was being a servant to Jesus, and it was very much an act of repentance and kind of asking for forgiveness because
just honoring
she was
her,
a sinner.
honoring him.
And so he's like, hey, let her do it. You guys are trying to stop her from doing a good thing.
Yeah.
Don't stop people from doing good things. But out of context, yeah, that doesn't make much sense. Why do you make trouble for the woman? Ooh, there's another question. I don't think it's on this list. It's in John chapter 2, where Jesus asks, "Woman, what does this have to do with me?" He's speaking to his mother. I think it's when she goes and tells her there's no wine left at the wedding feast, and he's like, "What does this have to do with me?"
Good question. Didn't it? Unless he drank wine.
She must have been like, "Hey, you gonna do a miracle?" She was maybe prodding.
What was his first miracle, though? I thought
that was his first miracle.
So why would she know? But anyway,
maybe she just had that kind of faith.
Intuition, motherly intuition.
Matthew 26:53. Do you think I cannot call upon my Father, and he will not provide me at this moment with more than 12 legions of angels? See, I think that's a powerful question right there.
Yeah, our God is an awesome God, and he has...
that, but also, Jesus could have had an out.
Yeah.
He could have... Well, there's the song, 10,000 Angels,
Yeah.
He could have called 10,000 angels and destroyed the world, to destroy the world and set him free. Jesus didn't have to die on the cross, but he did it because his Father wanted it. He did it because that was God's will. So he had a way out the entire time. He didn't have to suffer any of it, but he did. And so I think that makes that question very powerful.
Yeah. I mean, and that applies to any situation that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if God wanted to, he could call in 12 legions of angels to save us from anything, but we're going through this for a reason.
Mm-hmm. And he can save us in other ways.
Yeah.
Other less overwhelming ways, usually. We're at the end of Matthew, where Jesus asks his final question during his first life, I guess you could say it, which I think is his final words before he dies, at least that we know of. My God, why have you forsaken me? That's the question he gives, and then he dies. Moving on into Mark. These are all, they're all in order.
Oh, Mark 8:12 is an interesting one. So let's give a little bit of pre-story to this. Have you ever heard arguments for like atheist arguments of like, if God was real, why doesn't he make himself more obvious?
Yeah, if God was here, why does he allow all this suffering to be? Or you hear so many stories of people like asking for something to prove to them that God exists.
Yeah. And so that's what the question, and it's interesting because this was the same question they were asking back then.
Yeah.
Even though Jesus was giving them quite a few signs,
mm-hmm.
They still needed more.
So Mark 8:12. I'll start in 11. The Pharisees came out and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And here you can just really feel Jesus in this verse right here, sighing deeply in his spirit. He's he is very done. People. And so he says, and then he said, why does this generation seek for a sign? Truly I say to it, no sign will be given to this generation. Leaving them, he again embarked and went away to the others. There were a couple times when Jesus was kind of he was a little fed up with people, essentially, with the people of that generation. And you look at us, you mentioned that before we even read the verse. How many people are there nowadays who seek an obvious sign in order to prove that God exists?
And the funny thing about this is God does give us signs. We just choose to ignore them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's so many things that we could take as signs. We just choose to see them as something other than a sign. And if God made it more obvious, we just choose to see that as not as coincidence too. It's like the story of the rich man who had a poor man at his gate.
Right. And then he dies, and he's like, "Oh, can you please send Lazarus back to my brothers to tell them about this, and so save them?"
Yeah.
And then Abraham asked the question.
I mean, if it wasn't obvious, if you couldn't figure this out without him, why would they believe him now?
Yeah, you had Moses and the prophets. If they could not figure it out from then even someone returning from the dead, would not convince them.
So that's pretty harsh judgment there. Like, if we're not willing to look at the signs that are clearly before us in this day and age,
right? What
would we listen to?
That's a good point. So on the cross, there were people mocking Jesus, jeering at him, saying like, if you're the Son of God, save yourself. You saved others. Why can't you save yourself? And they were trying to get him to do something like that. And the thing I think about is, if he did do it, if he did just get off the cross,
they wouldn't have believed him.
Would they have just tried to kill him again? Like, if he got off the cross and then kept teaching the way he was, wouldn't the Pharisees just try to kill him again?
I mean, they're already making so many excuses.
Right. Jesus brought people back from the dead.
Yeah.
And he
healed
the blind. They had all the evidence they needed, but sometimes that's not enough for us humans.
Yeah, we have enough power of irrational thought to overwhelm any amount of evidence that's thrown at us.
Mm-hmm. We have enough irrational thought to overwhelm anything. Because the way I see it, I look around and I see all of creation as proof that God exists, but you have to open your eyes in order to start seeing that.
Yeah. I mean, like, evolution is like the biggest thing, like, for me, is that people are actively working to figure out how to ignore this massive sign that God exists.
Mm-hmm.
They are coming up with all these theories, and they're constantly trying to figure out how we can make it work so that God doesn't exist. It's like the sign is there. We're working as hard as you can to make it to
not see it.
To not see it.
Right.
It's crazy.
That's what we do as people. It's sad. Okay, so I said we were done with Matthew. I actually saw a question that I want to go back for.
Lie it.
Forgive me. So Matthew 22, starting in 18. I'm going to go earlier. So the Pharisees are trying to plot to, like, catch Jesus. And so they're asking him questions to catch him in something. So they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are truthful and teach the way of God in truth, and defer to no one, for you are not partial to any." They're kind of buttering him up a little bit. "Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to give a poll tax to Caesar or not?" But Jesus perceived their malice and said, "Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the poll tax." And they brought him a denarius, and he said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" They said to him, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." So there, again, he answers a question with a question. And there's several, especially when the Pharisees are trying to catch him, there's several instances where Jesus does this, and it's just really amazing because he completely changes the direction of the conversation from being, they're accusing him and trying to trap him, to all of a sudden he has, essentially
flipped it on them.
He's flipped it on them, and then oftentimes they can't answer.
Yeah, and one side it just shows that he's very wise. The other side it just shows, he's full of wisdom. And this is this is the most well-known example of, like, Jesus flipping questions. Mm-hmm. It's so iconic, I guess.
And the thing I draw from it is, if Jesus can do that with questions, so can we. Yeah. And so if Jesus were to if he were to have tried to make a statement and just answer them right out, it wouldn't have been nearly as good as if he asked them a question and then they answered the question and then he made a statement based on that.
Yeah, like, if you would have answered them right out, they would have picked apart his wording and accused him of different things based on what he said. And it's like, it's messy.
Right.
It's like what happens in politics.
And I just thought of another one where he does this, and this is actually not on our list for some reason. There again, the Pharisees are trying to catch him, and what do they ask him? Oh, they ask him, "By whose authority are you doing these things?" Meaning, by whose authority are you healing and casting out demons? And instead of answering, Jesus asks them, so he says, "I will answer by what authority I do these things if you answer my question first." Yeah. By whose authority did
John baptize?
John the Baptist baptize? Heaven, or was it from man, or was it from heaven? And then the Pharisees get in their little huddle and they try to discuss it with themselves because his question caught them essentially red-handed. Yeah. Not really red-handed, but it caught them because no matter what they answered, they were either going to have to make a bunch of people mad, or they were going to have to be hypocritical and answer something that they knew was in conflict with because they didn't believe, they thought John was, doing things for himself. But they knew that if they answered, he did these things by the power of man, everyone would get angry. Yeah, and so that's what the questions are so powerful, is you can catch people in their own hypocrisy and inaccuracies. Instead of answering somebody with a statement that they can pick apart and attack you on, you answer them with a question that they catch themselves on. It's like, because people want to think more about themselves anyway, so it gives them a good opportunity to think about themselves critically.
which people sometimes don't do very often. And so questions help people think critically about their own beliefs. And so that's the whole point of this podcast, I guess, or this part of this podcast is to learn, I guess, the power of questions
and learn from Jesus, straight
Yeah.
from Jesus. There's actually a couple of the sermons recently of how we can communicate better with people and not get hostile or defensive in our conversations. And one of the things that was suggested was, instead of responding harshly or counterattacking, you ask a question, or you diffuse the situation, like, oh, I'm sorry about that. How can I do better in the future? Just like how Jesus did, we can redirect conversations. We can redirect arguments even in a way that is better for everyone involved.
Yeah, productive.
Much more productive, yes. So, good things to keep in mind. We have more questions to go through.
Let's do a couple more and on our thesis.
Our thesis?
Yeah, our thesis question.
There's a lot of questions that Jesus asked. We can't go through all of them. You'll have to... Oh, here's a good one. Mark 9:50. Salt is good, but if salt loses its flavor, how can it become salty again? That goes right in line with our channel, right?
Yeah.
Basically, we as Christians, that we should be...
Salty.
We should be flavorful. We should be noticeable by other people as something different. But we can lose that. And if we do lose it, how do we get it back?
If we lose it, then we become ice melting salt. And what happens to ice melting salt? People walk on it. And
It turns into slush, and you wash it off your car.
And that's what happens if Christians lose their flavor, is that people just walk all over them. And then you're not doing any good. You're just laying there.
Mm-hmm.
And so be salty, otherwise you will be walked on.
That's the whole point of this channel, right?
Yeah.
Encouraging each other not to lose our flavor and to have more flavor. There's some really good vague questions here that would not work without context. Luke 6:46. Why do you call me Lord, Lord? Luke 6:46. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I command you? I don't know what the context of that is exactly, but again, I think it's Jesus talking to the Pharisees again.
You honor me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me. Get away from me, you evildoers. There's the rest of that verse.
Yeah. Yeah, so again, Jesus talking to the Pharisees, and it's a good question. Why are you professing me, but your heart is not in it, and probably your actions aren't in it? That's something we can ask ourselves as well.
Yeah. Are we just saying the words and not walking the walk? Are we just professing Jesus just to adhere to social pressures, or to make people happy, or to not rock the boat, or whatever reason?
Mm-hmm.
Are we just saying it but not doing it? And why?
In Luke 10:36, this is right after he's given the parable of the Good Samaritan, and at the end he asks, so there's the three people. There's the priest, there's the Levite. They both pass on the other side, and then there's the Samaritan who actually helps the guy, right?
Yeah.
So at the end he asks, which of these three, in your opinion, was neighbor to the robber's victim? And to which the guy kind of begrudgingly had to admit, I suppose it was the one who showed him mercy. He didn't even have the guts to say it was the Samaritan, right? Because Samaritans were looked down upon.
Yeah.
But it was a simple question that worked to really drive home the point of Jesus' parable, which was, if you have mercy, that is the true neighbor.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that you were the person who should have done it, or...
Yeah, just imagine that this guy asked, who is my neighbor? And Jesus replied with like a long sermon or statement, like, oh, your neighbor is somebody who needs help. that wouldn't have been nearly as impactful as the way he said it, where it's like he gives a whole example of how the neighbor could be even somebody you despise on a social level, and but you help those who need help. And so that's a much more impactful answer than just saying help those who need help.
Right. And another thing you should notice about a lot of these questions that Jesus asks is they're all open-ended. They're all pretty open-ended. He doesn't ask yes/no questions because the yes/no question gets answered and then the conversation's done. He asks open-ended questions that will cause whoever asks them to have to think it through, right?
Mind school.
And oftentimes that thinking it through will basically convict them if they're the Pharisees trying to trick him.
Yeah.
He'll expose their hypocrisy and their malice. Did not Luke 11:40? Did not the maker of the outside also make the inside? So this is the Pharisees. They dressed very fancy and had a lot of outward actions that made them look really spiritual, but on the inside, he called them he called them whitewashed tombs. Not a good thing to be called.
I don't even know what that's supposed to mean.
So on the outside, it's white and it looks nice. On the inside, there's dead bones.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
That's what Jesus was getting at. So God made both our hearts and our externals. We should make them be in line. We should not put so much effort on the outside.
Yeah.
You have any more questions you want to highlight?
I think we should probably.
We really have like 30 more if we wanted to.
Yeah, it's nice to have more than you need rather than the other way. Well, this has been a good podcast episode. We talked for a little while.
Yeah, we talked about Ruben being on. We talked about my video and about constant revival and what that would look like. And we went over a lot of questions. We dropped the dramatic voice.
Yeah, you thought it was distracting.
It was distracting, and then I just forgot about it.
So the takeaways from this podcast is that we're going to start doing song specials.
No.
I think we'll go for karaoke. I think that'll be better.
Sure. No promises.
So we're going to start doing karaoke. Okay, and we're going to start doing more dramatic readings. That's the main takeaways. And if those don't happen, it's going to know that we're slacking.
Yeah, and you'll call us out on it.
Yeah.
Another takeaway, which I think this is something that actually relates with us talking about constant revival and questions, is we talked about how having a deeper conversation with someone could be as simple as asking them, so what have you been studying lately, or what's something that's been on your heart recently? Something that God's put on your heart. That's a great question. That's also a gateway into a deeper conversation, I think.
Yeah.
And so just thinking, the point of it is, point of us talking about questions and going through some of Jesus's questions, a very small percentage, is how can we use questions like Jesus used questions? There's a lot of things to learn from him. He used them rhetorically. He used them sometimes almost seeming like jokingly or sarcastically.
He was pretty sarcastic.
And there were times he used them to completely change the direction of a conversation in a way that is really admirable. It takes a really wise person to do that.
Yeah, and questions are, I mean, it's pretty common, like, even in your stereotypical, like, how to be a good conversationalist book. People like to talk about themselves. And if you want somebody to talk, you do a well-directed question. And it's much more, it's better at opening a conversation than starting off with something about you.
I've also heard it said multiple times, actually, that if you're in like a Bible study, or if you're talking with someone and they ask a question about something, that it might be a question with a fairly simple answer, but it might not be quite to the heart of the matter. So sometimes if you just answered the question, the conversation would be over and then it'd be done. But maybe they're wanting you to dig a little deeper and to invest yourself a little more in them. So sometimes when somebody else asks you a question like, I don't have an example. You should ask them, like, so why are you asking that? Or is there something behind that? Things like that, because sometimes people use like little questions as kind of like as probing for something deeper.
Oh.
So maybe they're sharing just a little bit of themselves, but they're trying to see if you're someone that they can trust with this, right? And so instead of just answering a question, sometimes it's good to ask a question back, and then you can maybe drive a little deeper and then show that person that you're someone who can be talked to. You're someone who's going to care at least a little bit.
Yeah.
I've heard that multiple times.
That makes sense. I think I've seen people do that to me. Anyway.
Don't ask yes/no questions. Don't answer yes/no questions.
Well, actually, yes/no questions have a place.
They do have a place.
If you're with a bunch of hypothetical scenario, if you're leading a youth group and you have a bunch of teenagers that don't want to talk, it's good to start with something that forces them to talk, and then you can work way up from there.
Yeah, maybe.
I've seen this happen before.
But also, it's really shallow. If the answer is always Jesus, you never get anywhere. Anyway, good podcast. We'll see you next week, and we'll talk about something else. We have no idea, actually. Well, we probably have an idea, but not a good idea.
Yeah. Anyway.
Until then, we went over the question tonight. Mark 9:50. If salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? What's the point of me bringing that up all over again? Is that you should be salty. You should be the salt of the earth. And that's what we're going to end on.